Good afternoon, Austin. Hope everyone is having a wonderful day today. I'm joined today by Joe Gross, the CEO of the Austin Monitor. We were just discussing prior to jumping on the wonderful hot weather that we still have here in mid September here in Austin, Texas. Again, it's a guy who's originally from up north. I'll still take the heat over the cold any day of the week, but I'm kind of ready for some mid 80s weather instead of high 90s weather for sure. So.
Yeah, likewise for me, Troy. Though I did grow up here, so I should be used to it by now. But I was
Yeah,
telling you earlier, late September at 100 degrees is enough to make anyone tired of the long summer here. You
yeah.
know.
Well, and I've been here 17 years, so again, like I've definitely, the blood, my blood was always thin. Like I always
Yeah.
hated the cold when I lived up north, so that's not that part of it hasn't changed at all. But it's again, it definitely it gets to the point where you're like, okay, a little cooler weather. Wouldn't mind a little kind of fall, and especially for me, like it is one of those things that I associate with like football weather and going to, if you go to games and stuff, it's like, oh, it's like kind of comfortable and you have to wear a sweatshirt, and here you're like, you're having to check the stands to make sure that you're in the shaded side of the field, not the sunny side of the field, so that way you don't
That's
don't
I
get
know.
the
I got to give it up to those UT fans or the Austin FC fans that have been going to those games and just baking in that sun. I saw some of those on TV, and I think that's a young person's game. I don't know if I could do that for 3, 4, 5 hours in some of that direct sun there.
Yeah, for sure. So you are the CEO of the Austin Monitor. For those that don't know, kind of tell us maybe a little bit about what the Austin Monitor is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, kind of local publication, really kind of focused on in-depth issues that are affecting the community. And our roots go actually back to the late 90s when the founders of the original publication called In Fact had kind of noticed a void in the local news and information space on kind of this reporting focused on in-depth issues, local government, and they stood up this publication to kind of address that need. And for a long time, it was this very niche focused publication that just did really good in-depth reporting. But a couple years ago, right when I was coming on, the board and I had really seen the information space change in Austin and across the country. And we felt that there was really a high need amongst the community for people to have access to kind of the news that we were putting out there, and not necessarily a subscription fee to get that. The kind of news that we do really is intended to help inform the community. And since we live in a governmental system as a democracy where we make collective decisions together, it really strengthens the community to have a good, solid information source that people can use and reference and ultimately make these shared decisions together. So about a year ago, last November, we switched our model to really become kind of a member donor supported model where all of our news and resources are now free for the community. And have had a really great response from that. We've had a lot of new readers come in, and I'm telling you, the city of Austin is changing so much that we really feel like we made this transition at the right time. And the news space, which I know we'll talk about a lot more today, is really changing a lot too. So we feel like we're in a really strong position to continue to serve the community, which is what we do as a nonprofit.
Nice. And so, what got you interested or wanting to be involved in journalism,
Yep.
news media, that kind of stuff? Was that something that you'd always had a passion about as a young kid, or what kind of brought you to want to go that route?
Yeah, great question. There actually is a picture of me as a very young kid wearing some of my dad's cast-off clothes, reading a newspaper, just kind of emulating him. I don't know if that was a harbinger or a sign that I would go into this. Probably not. But really, I got first exposed to kind of the news, information, journalism space when I worked in Washington, D.C. I worked for a senator there on Capitol Hill, but I was on the other side of the equation where I was trying to work with local news sources to try to get coverage and stories picked up about what was going on in Washington. But when I was there, it was right around 2009, 2010. And you were really beginning to see kind of some fracturing in the shared news and information space. Social media was really just starting. Working in DC, it was really kind of pretty combative and acrimonious in the news space, and that kind of put a marker in my head to say, wow, this is like this shared news and information space is really starting to kind of encounter some major challenges. Someone should probably do something about that one day. And ultimately, I made my way back to Austin after DC, and I worked in the nonprofit space, kind of built my career there. But when the Austin Monitor had kind of approached me, and I learned that they were thinking about really changing how they serve the community to address these challenges in the news space, I thought it was a great opportunity to really kind of leverage that came full circle to my early career when I was working in Washington.
Well, it's a good thing that over the last 10 years that divisiveness in the media has gotten better. Maybe not, but that's a whole nother another thing. But it's kind of interesting in the fact that, right, like obviously free press, which, in the Constitution is like one of the pillar amendments in the Constitution, or one of the pillar rights in the Constitution. And obviously, nowadays that's media of any sort, whether it's television, print, social media, all those kind of things, like it is super important. But at the same point in time, because of advances in the internet and social media and stuff, it's also made running profitable newspapers, profitable media outlets, in some degrees more challenging, right? Like it's one of those where obviously it doesn't really matter what side of the alley you're on. You feel like half of the media is spewing lies against what you would believe is the truth in that regard. And so, but like it's also one of those things where the hyperbole of a lot of the things that are out there is also kind of what draws views and stuff. So I feel like we're in an interesting time, and it really is, like, while it's been obviously happening for a number of years, it is still, if you take the 10,000-foot view, it is a really short amount of time. And I do think that in time, things will start to get understood better and handled better, and less divisiveness will happen. There'll always be cycles of that, the same way there are cycles of everything in world history. But we're just in a time right now where there's things are easily fractured, and you can have that divisiveness very easily, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I'm glad you mentioned, a couple of those points, and I'll jump on them here, that, for the, most of the history of our country, which, does enshrine that right to a free press and how important that is in how we carry on. The news was carried forward by, for-profit newspaper companies, right? They, had a good business model where they could survive, and also provided a civic service, right? And that was the dynamic that worked well for a long time. But when the internet, the kind of digital information revolution happened, newspapers really were either slow to adapt or kind of ignored this rising, very powerful technology. And the result is, since 2004, 2,000 newspapers across the country have shuttered. And that's because it has really become very challenging for a for-profit newspaper to continue to survive. There's a lot of competition out there. Especially most of these were driven forward from advertising dollars. And a lot of the advertising dollars are now going to kind of more targeted technologies, whether it be social media, whether it be, your Googles of the world. And so the industry, in a very short period of time over these last really couple decades, has kind of been reeling. And the result is, this civic service that was provided, it needs to be carried forward in some capacity. And that's why you're seeing a large kind of spike in these nonprofit news organizations. Right in our backyard, we have the Texas Tribune, which was one of the early leaders in the nonprofit news space. They launched in about, I think, at the end of 2009. And when they first launched, there was, people in the industry were kind of like, oh, I don't know if this can work at scale. I don't know if this is going to continue to thrive. And, the Tribune has done really well year after year, and now has become, I would say, one of the preeminent news sources, not just in the country, but certainly in Texas. And I think this concept, this model of, hey, we're going to provide you a service. And for our approach, it's not, we don't publish opinion pieces or editorials because there's such a demand for just kind of fact-driven news. And it's really hard to find that. And so, I think the nonprofit model is really forward-looking. It's still very hard to stand up. It still certainly has its challenges as building any media organization. But I do think like putting the mission of an informed community, trying to build deep relationships with the community, putting that front and center is something that is going to be really important in our shared information space going forward.
Definitely, yeah. So you mentioned having worked in Washington, D.C., and then kind of coming back to Austin. For college, were you a journalism major? Was that something that you kind of focused in? Like, had you made that decision to kind of go that direction in college, or again, like a lot of people, do you have a degree in mechanical engineering and work as a journalist type of thing?
Too funny. No, was certainly not smart enough to be a mechanical engineer. I actually did go to UT, which has a great engineering school. I was in the kind of the communication school, so there were certainly journalists in my orbit, but I was more kind of the broad kind of communication side, actually corporate communications. My very first role out of college was in working for the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta doing corporate communications. I quickly realized, I needed something a little bit more with a public service, kind of that mission driven. If you haven't caught on, that really inspires kind of my work and career. And so, that's what led me to Washington, D.C., for better or worse. And I'll tell you, Washington's pretty political. And so, like I said, it was a very interesting time to be there, and I learned a lot. But the nonprofit space really, I think, suits me best because you're really getting to put kind of the impact and the mission front and center. And so, the journalism space kind of, I guess, came to me. But the exciting thing is that, while I, of course, work closely with a lot of the journalists on our team and the reporters, my focus area is kind of building this organization and also kind of what the impact is. And that means, how well are we doing informing the community? How equitably are we doing, a job of informing the community as a nonprofit that's meant to do that? And so, some of those, areas that really haven't been front and center for news organizations are areas that I'm looking at in my role. And I think that's what really excites me. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Austin's a really exciting city and community, but it's really facing some big questions right now. And I feel like we're at this special inflection point, and to be able to share what's going on, these issues that we're taking on, and invite people to become informed and actually to be a part of these issues, to add their voice to those issues. I mean, I feel that's how you build like a strong community, and that's kind of one of the more exciting areas of my work for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Again, the closer you are to the issue, right? So again, if it's an issue in your backyard, when it comes to, say, a school or construction or development, stuff like that, obviously the more people tend to have a reason and a desire to get involved versus a lot of times bigger, broader issues that feel like you're such a small voice in a sea of tens of thousands, millions of people and stuff that way. So it definitely can help inspire more people to want to get involved that way, and to take interest, right? So it's easier for a more localized paper to kind of draw that interest than it is, say, a larger statewide or national type of paper where you're having to kind of be broad in the topics that you cover, but then it doesn't necessarily really capture the interests of a lot of the people because it just doesn't really affect them imminently.
Yeah, I think you make a great point on that. And that's actually what you're seeing, with your national papers like your Wall Street Journal, your New York Times, they're going to cover a lot of these issues that, affect us, but it's on a national stage. It can seem distant. A lot of times they'll frame it in a very kind of political light. and they do that because, one, that is helps engage a certain subset of their readers. And two, it's an easier way to kind of break down that issue. On the local front, you get to say, hey, we're going to actually look at this in relation to where you live. One of the features we have on our publication is the ability to kind of zoom into the stories that are in your city council district. A lot of the stories we cover are broken out by the council districts that affect the Austin area. And so all of a sudden, when you're reading a story based on an issue that is in your backyard that you mentioned, it kind of takes a different light, almost what we hope, could be a little bit less political and a little bit more, pragmatic to understand, okay, this is what's going on. This is how this might evolve. This is how, you might be able to add your voice to it, or you might be able to share with your neighbors. And that's kind of like, a big part of what the ideal image is for local news. The problem is that, you're getting a lot of competition in the news space. And so you really have to build that strong connection with what your community is hoping to read, what they want to hear more of. And that's a big part of what we're trying to focus too. On the national scale, you can't really build that close relationship. Your audience is your entire country, the entire country for some regards. And so you're kind of, it's a little disconnected from that. And that's where I think, one of the advantages of the local news is in strength of the way that news was intended to be carried out.
No, you mentioned that like Austin's obviously facing some challenges. I mean, every place kind of does. What are some of the biggest challenges you see facing Austin over the next few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually carried kind of a series of stories this summer. We had a poll that was commissioned by an organization called Notley, and we were able to kind of publish the results of that poll. And I mean, anyone who's ever lived here or trying to live here has to put kind of housing at front and center. And you're seeing that a lot. We have this upcoming election. The mayoral candidates all the way down to the city council candidates. That is a top issue. Of course, anyone who's also ever lived in Austin has complained or endured the traffic. And so transportation is always going to be that key infrastructure issue that's usually right up there as well. And so ironically, it's probably, when you think about the main issues that are affecting the city, there's no, I wouldn't call them big surprises. You probably encountered most of, people that you chat with and interact with and probably encounter them in some capacities. The problem is these continue to endure because they're really hard issues, right? If there was easy solutions, or black and white solutions, we probably would have addressed that in some capacity. But I mean, Austin is a dynamic city, and so it's getting a lot of interest. And I think, when I was growing up in Austin, I'd always knew it was a special city. Everyone that came here kind of reiterated that, but I don't think it necessarily had that national profile that it does right now. I think what you're seeing is, and especially over the last couple of years, there are really a lot of eyes on Austin and how it deals with this kind of influx of growth and new business and new people and post-pandemic. And so these, I think a lot of people across the country are seeing, what will this city look like in the next, 10, 20 years? It certainly won't be that same archetypical city of the small, sleepy college town that had a few, tech companies, the seat of state government there. It's different, right? But what that looks like, we don't exactly know yet. Our goal is to help people become a little bit more aware, and then actually help them become a part of shaping what the future looks like. If people don't feel like they have a voice or that they have agency in kind of creating what the community looks like, I think then you start to see some really, some of these problems that have tough answers or tough pathways forward really start to get a little bit, heated and almost unproductive in the types of kind of, exchanges that you're happening.
Yeah, as a real estate agent, definitely have seen both, your two main issues you talk about there, traffic and housing, be some things front and center. It's also interesting to me how COVID affected both of them, and it exasperated the housing side of things because you had so many people moving from other parts of the country where they could find a place where they actually had a little bit more land, a little bit more space, less expensive housing. Even though if you live here, you don't feel like housing is expensive, but less expensive housing than on the East Coast or on the West Coast in a lot of instances. But at the same point in time, because of all the work from home and hybrid work things that are going on, potentially helped the traffic situation, or at least delayed some of the problems that would have been a lot worse had that not been a factor, had that not been a solution to the work environment for a lot of people. Because when I first moved here, like, you could even tell a difference between summer when UT was in session and stuff, and when they wasn't in session, and when it was in session, and suddenly traffic got worse because everyone was back to their regular 9 to 5s and no summer vacations. And so it's interesting how the impact that COVID had on both of those, one, hope a little positively of delaying some of how bad it got, and unfortunately on the other one, it definitely made it more challenging in the housing specter.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, any parent would know that there's a distinct change when school starts in terms of the traffic. Like, you got to add minutes, not minutes, probably scores of minutes to your commute after that school goes in session. I actually pass a few schools on my daily commute, and you can feel it. I think one of the interesting things that you had mentioned, and we explore, like, in this kind of post-COVID world that we're living in, is what does that mean for these shared spaces, right? Your downtown areas have always been really defined by the businesses, the workforce, and have been built around that in some regard, right? And in downtown Austin, you have I-35 kind of going right through downtown in one area, Mopac on the other side too, and they're kind of designed for that a lot of time for that commute and to go to work. And as that begins to change, what does that mean for these very communal spaces that we're having there? And I think there is a lot of different pathways where that could move forward, right? And that's where I think it gets really interesting from a community perspective. I think I've lived here long enough, worked in the news long enough to know that there's very seldom clear-cut answers to issues. I think there is a lot of different angles to consider, but the reality is, as seen with the housing thing, we're approaching, a point that is getting like a little close to unsustainable, if not already there in some of the areas that affect the community. And we really want to try to get ahead of those. We really want to try to come up with thoughtful solutions that pull in a lot of different voices, and then kind of try to move forward on those. But it is hard work. And so Austin, always a victim of its success in some regard, in that it becomes this very desirable city, but then you're going to face the challenges that come with that kind of designation.
Sure. And I say, in that regard, COVID didn't help because it did exasperate the amount of people moving here. And again, it's not necessarily everyone, but like the amount of people would have moved here eventually. Like, we already knew the kind of growth patterns. It just sped that up by 5 years or something like that, as far as making that happen.
Yeah, and that actually makes a difference because, a lot of these big, decisions that we're looking at, they're based on projections of future growth and change, right? And when you get a disruption in that, for better or worse, it really puts a strain on the system, and no one would have predicted COVID, right? It's hard to predict that. It's hard to, and so, that's one of the challenges, that communities always face, is that unpredictable aspect of it, right? Can you build strong systems, strong infrastructure that really can, be adaptable for kind of the unknown? That's a hard thing to do, right? But I think, if anyone's a betting person on the future of Austin, I think it's bullish, right? So I think we know that even more now than we did like 3-4 pre-pandemic years. And so with that in mind, we can take in that new information and really be like, okay, this is a city that we want to be, on the forefront, a city that we really want to put in those top level kind of cities for the future. What do we need to do to get there? And that's like, you need people need a place to live. They need a way to move around. And that's where those fundamental issues are really, not just unique to Austin, unique to some of the other cities, but especially unique to Austin because of this dramatic, kind of these dramatic trends that have been occurring over the last couple of years.
Are there any smaller or less impactful, significant things that you see going on that you're passionate about when it comes to Austin?
Yeah, I think, an interesting one, and we had asked this in that poll that I mentioned earlier, is kind of, the kind of the environmental natural resources, that lens, right? I mean, like we were just talking about the weather at the top of this, right? Austin is, and this summer, I think this July was the hottest July we've ever had on record, right? And so, when we talk about trends and seeing things that are coming up, with this influx of people, with some of the environmental like macro trends that are occurring there, that is going to shape. That's going to shape the city too. I think a really interesting one is water. And that's something that our friends in the western part of the country are really dealing with right now. But I really do think that will be a key, a very more it is an emergent issue, but it will probably be on the tip of people's tongues over the next decade. Man, water it fuels every part of life, right? You fundamentally need it to survive, and so I think that's an area that we hope to report on more and go deeper, and to give our readers in the community kind of a deeper understanding of that. We've done some really good stories on that this year, but I think that it's funny. We kind of take those things for granted, and that's when it starts to get a little bit, dangerous, because you just always assume, oh, these core essentials are always going to be here. But that would be an area that I'm really curious on how we will navigate together over, in the coming years.
Oh, it's 100% something that we take for granted. And obviously there are some cities in the United States right now that have been having major water issues for different reasons that way. But it's also, again, if you look back at history, it's been one of the biggest things that has affected civilizations, right? And so not that I think that the city of Austin or any specific city in the United States is going to be under siege and have to deal with lack of water coming in. But I mean, you can go all the way back to the Rome, and what was what ended up really kind of collapsing there was the fact that if you took out the aqueducts and their ability to have clean water, like that was the end of having a big thriving metropolis and stuff. And so it's definitely an issue that I think, not that it doesn't get attention, but it is definitely something that a lot of people take for granted, just because there's almost no one alive today that hasn't generally had access to here in the United States, I will say, here in the United States, that has had access to clean water out of a faucet almost their entire life.
Yeah, and I think, I think it was Cape Town, South Africa, that had there was called like a day zero, where that was the day that essentially they would run out of water. And I just can't imagine what that would have been like for the city and the community. And actually, it was there was an inspirational kind of side of that story where, they were able to kind of pull together, really conserve water, and put in these very collective measures, because, it was so vital and it was so imminent that they had to do something drastic. And I think, unfortunately, you're going to see things like that happen. I'm, not sure if that, hopefully not in the near future ever for the Austin area. But I mean, there are localities where that is front and center. And then you have to fall back on your ability to work through, navigate these shared challenges together as a community, right? And that's where you need that, almost what I'll call a muscle to be able to to interact with your neighbors, to share ideas with your neighbors, to come up with pathways that don't have a clear answer, and really really kind of find a way forward. That's kind of that's where strong communities really begin to shine, because I can tell you, another example of the natural resources is the freeze we had, right? And so, that is just these unexpected things that really tax a community. You have to be able to fall back on kind of the strength of the community, and able to to get through those things together. And, that's kind of one of the areas that I feel like we're working in. I think Austinites really do care about the community. And so we have a lot going for us on that front. But, still the ability to work through things is, that's a challenge for people. That you mentioned civilization, that's a big challenge. And, I think that's something that we hope we can strengthen with our work and what we're trying to do for the city.
Yeah. Fortunately, and all these are definitely important issues. Fortunately, I do think it shows that it's not as eminent. One of the things that is frustrating, not with the Austin Monitor, but with a lot of different organizations, is wanting to kind of create these false deadlines. I don't know enough about the Cape Town thing, but like these false deadlines of, when the apocalypse is going to hit for different purposes and stuff. But the fortunate fact is it doesn't feel like we're actually there yet, because a lot of the, for lack of a better word, crap that a lot of people tend to argue over and fight over and is divisive would go away if it really came down to, hey, we need food, we need drinking water, we need these super essential types of things. So on the one side, it's nice that obviously these things aren't quite as eminent, or we would really have people coming together to find a solution because it was of such dire consequences. On the bad side, it'd be nice if we didn't let it get to that before we decided to come together and actually create solutions to potential problems down the road.
Yeah, I think you're right. But and I just wanted to draw out one of the points that you mentioned there is that, there unfortunately there are, some bad actors in this news and information space, right? And if your whole design is to make money, and you'll do that at all costs, what you begin to undermine there is the public trust, right? And so if you're putting out these sensationalist doomsday headlines to draw in attention, that gets into the psyche of people, right?
You can only cry wolf so often before people don't believe you're going to cry that it's actually a wolf.
Exactly, yeah. And so, I mean, to some extent, we saw some of that, when we were navigating the pandemic, right? And that was one of the greatest challenges. It was probably the greatest social challenge I've endured in my lifetime in this modern information landscape. And I'll tell you, it really exposed some vulnerabilities and weaknesses in that. And it made me, proud of the work that I'm doing, but also, very curious, and if not a little bit concerned for the next time something big comes up like this, because, it is the only way to get through it is to kind of have a good kind of set of facts and information that you can work on. And there's just a lot out there, right? You mentioned, social media provides a platform where everyone essentially kind of becomes a publisher. Those gatekeepers of the news 50 years ago, where you had to go through an editor, you had to go to a process that, that's rapidly disappearing, and that's not coming back, and I think in a way that gives people access to a lot more information, but the quality of that information can be very questionable, and there can be bad actors out there that take advantage of that too.
There's that, and the other downside to me is the fact that while it's super positive, right? Like you can live anywhere, you can kind of do anything, but and you can find your community, whether they're in your actual neighborhood or not. The downside of that being is that you can get in these echo chambers that don't force you to think of outside of what you already believe to be true, like and challenge your thought system. And hey, is what and not that what people believe in a lot of cases might not be true, but you never get challenged by the other side of the coin and trying to debate that or see that side. And so that's, I think, again, a component of social media that is unfortunate. Like I say, it's great that people can find people, regardless of your interests or beliefs or thought process, you can find people and be a part of a community anywhere in the world. That's amazing. But the flip side of that is then you don't ever have to listen to the people who think anything differently than you. If you don't want to, you can just assume they're wrong on anything and everything.
Yeah, that's not the recipe for a healthy democracy. No. And, it makes us uncomfortable to hear opinions that are different than ours, or viewpoints that are different than ours, but that's a way of life. And I will tell you that, that one of the good things about newspapers is that, back in the day, they would expose you to these other types of angles on stories or issues that you might not have considered. And that's one of the things that we like to do with our work is like, the District 1 is very different than like a District 9 in the city of Austin. And so like giving people some insight to be like, hey, there's nuances and different like issues and different perceptions across this community. And that's not a bad thing, right? And it's not a bad thing to see something differently than someone else, right? In fact, that's just the reality of how it is. But what you need to build the kind of the muscle and the skill set is to be able to take in that kind of differing opinion, differing perception, differing viewpoint, have a conversation with someone about that, and then come out of that not viewing them as an enemy, right? But just viewing that as like, okay, I'm going to take that in. And I think, social media, politics in general has become very personal, become an extension of your identity. And that makes it problematic because then you feel like if someone disagrees in you, they're threatening who you are as an individual. And that was not how the system was meant to be designed. That's not how we'll be able to kind of press forward together on some of these major issues. And so it's really interesting space to be in, really interesting time to be building community and for the city itself, like Austin, which is facing a lot of these really challenging issues just with the immense amount of growth and kind of excitement that has come as part of the city.
Yeah. So what do you see? Where do you see the Austin Monitor kind of going over the next couple of years? Like obviously you have the nonprofit component to try to be able to shape things the way you guys see best. Are there any kind of changes that you guys see coming down the road, or how do you kind of foresee things going for your company?
So now that we've kind of changed this model where everything is fully accessible to the community, regardless of your ability to contribute or pay, it kind of opens up a whole new exciting kind of pathway for us. And what we really like to do is to get out there in the community a bit more and kind of build some deeper relationships with various areas across the city. News has this bad reputation of being viewed as like a one-way street of like the news organization saying, hey, here's what's important. This is what you should read. And the way that we're approaching that is a bit differently, of viewing it as kind of a two-way street where, hey, these are the issues that's going on. What do you think about those? What would you like to see more of? And really building that strong relationship with the community to help inform the type of the stories and reporting and the type of work that we're doing. That's the exciting thing about a nonprofit is, our metric of success is not a bottom line. It's not a return on shareholder value. It's how well the community really is responding to the work that we're doing. And the way to do that is to kind of get out there more. And so what we'd like to do is really begin to kind of go out there, build relationships with the community in a way that we've never been able to do before, in a way that, kind of our unique designation as a nonprofit kind of helps us kind of build that trust and build that relationship with the community.
That's awesome. So what are kind of the best ways for people to obviously, find out, read the stories, find out about the information and get more involved with the Austin Monitor?
Yeah. So a couple ways I wanted to share. The first is we actually have kind of a big civic event coming up at the Long Center on October 5th. It's called City Summit. It's meant to kind of bring together elected officials, city leaders, community members to go a little bit deeper on some of the stories that we're reporting. We have a few panels. We have a mayoral forum. And so that's open to the community. It's the tickets are about $20 for general admission. So it's meant to be accessible to everyone. We actually have some tickets. If you can't afford a ticket, we have some reserved for the community as well on that one. It's meant to be very accessible and service the community. Beyond that, I think our newsletter is our probably our touch point to kind of keep a pulse on what's going on every day. I know some people that, they'll get that daily email, they'll scan through the stories, they might click in on a few, or they might just scan the headlines, and that will kind of help them keep a pulse on what's going on there. The third way is we are building out this kind of aspect called kind of our civic engagement opportunities. And that's where we have certain editorial posts tagged with this opportunity for you to take the next step. So if you've been following an issue, if you're really passionate about something that you read, a couple of the, what we'll try to do is on our stories, we'll have this opportunity for you to say, okay, here's what's going on for you to kind of take the next step with what you're reading there. And so, all three of those, these, some of these community-based events, our newsletters, our website, the civic engagement opportunities that will show up on our website as well. These are all meant to help you kind of take the next step in your journey of building a stronger connection with the community. The baseline, for an ideal person who's reading the Austin Monitor is someone that I care about the community. I'd like to learn a little bit more. I might be a little bit intimidated by, how the local government runs or what these elected officials do. We're meant to be that place to give you that first step and to help you keep kind of a deeper understanding and following these issues. And that's kind of like, if you're at that place and you're looking to learn more about what's going on here, without kind of an opinionated kind of viewpoint, this is a good publication for you.
Yeah, and we're less than 2 months away from an election, so it's a great time to get involved and actually try to spike some midterm election turnout, which obviously usually is not near the same level as the presidential election turnout.
It is a tough one, but I'll tell you, man, the Austin has a really high registered voter count, and I think again that's a point of pride for the city. So now, can we activate that? We'll be putting out for the local election kind of a resource which aggregates all of our stories and gives you all the information you need. I would recommend for folks if it's much easier to actually go make it to the voting booth if you have a plan and have a friend that you can go with. I recommend it to everyone to say, okay, set a day when you're going to go, call friends, say, hey, we're going to go up there together. Map it out, and studies have shown that if you do those little steps, you're much more likely to do it. And it's really hard. I mean, life is busy. We got kids, school, work going on, but this is the opportunity for you to say, hey, here's the direction where I'd like the community to go. And that's a sacred opportunity, and that's the way that we view it. And so the more people that go and add their voice and turn out to vote, I believe the stronger the community is. So we're hoping that it will be a really, I know it'll be an interesting election. We're hoping that the turnout is really good for the election too.
Yeah. Plus, if you're one of those people who thinks that, your vote's not that important, like midterms are the ones where it actually impacts it more because there's fewer overall turnout. So you can have a bigger impact. So
true. I mean, it's funny on the local level, you can see elections be shaped by, a handful of votes. And so that is real, on the national level, when you vote for president, you say, oh, there's millions of votes differences, though I'll tell you, there have been some really close elections over the last couple of decades. But on local level, that's when it really, every single vote carries even more weight on that one.
Definitely. Cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on and do the podcast with me today, Joel. Like I say, for people that are looking to Joel mentioned all those different things. I'm assuming the website, the Austin Monitor, a great place to kind of get more information about those specific events and potentially sign up for the newsletter if you'd like to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a starting place. Everything is housed there. And like I said, spread the word. A lot of people are starting to learn who the Austin Monitor is. But now that everything on there is fully free and meant for you to consume, you could very easily get lost on a rabbit hole chasing down water conservation issues, which might be fun in its own right if you're in the right mindset for that. But yeah, the website is the main spot to go to.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining me today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay cool.
Thank you very much, Troy.